Game dev is always so much clearer in my head. It could be that excitement in the early stages that really muddles things, or it could be those tiny details that I never truly work out in the moment that always come back to bite me. But in the beginning it always seems so clear, until it isn't. So today I was going to look at the changes from the beginning of my game to where it is now and how I got there. So part of me thinks it comes from not knowing what makes a really good game tick. And it's really hard to know. As players, we're in the dark when it comes to the choices developers make, and we sort of try to reverse engineer all the answers for the developer, but I feel like if you could really nail them down, they'd have way better answers on why they did certain things than we could ever guess. It's almost like you had to see it when it failed to make it something good. And boy, have I seen all stuff that I do fail. That's good. I'm good at that part of it. And I'm not even sure that my game's in a fun or good state right now, but it's in a different state, and I think that state is better. So here are some of those big changes. When I started, because I was new to development, my options were pretty limited, and that led me to some core ideas. The first one was a center room, a large room with a camera, and enemies would spawn in this room. And the sole purpose of doing one large room was pretty simple. I don't know how to do procedurally generated content. I still don't know, so to keep the game kind of small and to avoid all that, we'll just have this one room. That's the core of the game. We fight enemies in this room. The initial idea was you get money for killing enemies, and the longer you stay in the room, the more money you get, so you have this risk reward. So the first thing to change from this design was I realized that if there's no boss room, it doesn't really feel like there's a good progression. So probably a couple months in, I decided let's add a boss room, and I should figure out how I can move the player, change the camera, but keep it in the same scene. And I think this was a success, but of course, it just kept increasing the scope. So now we have boss rooms and bosses to fight. So while this is all happening, I'm also working on the shop and what we're going to spend our money on. First, I added just basic stuff like healing the player or buying TNT, but when that didn't have a big impact on the gameplay, I wanted to move on to the big, flashy, fun stuff. I wanted to add weapon mods. And this led to two big problems once I started sharing the game with friends. So for a reminder, the core of the game was staying in these waves for as long as possible. But my first feedback when I showed it to friends was that no one understood that, and they would just end the waves as fast as they possibly could and have no money. The way I had it set up back then is when you would end a wave, you could rest, and after resting 3 times, the boss room would open. So they'd just be speedrunning to the boss room without knowing it, and then just getting destroyed. This was probably solvable with some communication if it didn't come hand in hand with the other problem, that good players had it too good, and bad players had it way, way too bad. And by this I mean a good player would have more money and they'd be better off, but a bad player would have less money, couldn't spend money on anything but healing, and then they go into a boss room with basically nothing. I struggled with this for such a long time. I wanted the players to keep their agency, at least some level of control, but eventually I had to just let this go. So I removed sleeping and ending nights. Instead now there was just a set of waves and you had to get through them all to get to the boss. This also meant changing the lantern's functionality drastically. The lantern had 2 purposes. One was ending the round. After you killed enough enemies, it would charge up. But the other one was these abilities that were getting tied onto the lantern, so when you used it, you were incentivized to kind of keep fighting. Well, it turns out those abilities were fun enough where those are all still in. We just take out the ability to end the round, and so now the lantern just becomes like this activated item that the player has. So, needless to say, I was pretty devastated hearing this news. You always think that your idea is going to be novel and exceptional and fun, and no one's really done something like that, but usually there's reasons why no one's done something like that. It's funny too, because I could kind of feel some of those issues even though I couldn't pinpoint them at the time. It's very reminiscent of working on an art piece and taking just 5 minutes away and coming back and being like, yeah, he's upside down, or whatever. There's some issue with the character. Now you can see it. But at least for me in game dev, I need someone else. I can't like pinpoint that alone. It reminds me of this great Mark Rosewater quote, who's someone who worked on Magic the Gathering. He does a lot of insight to game design. But he said that your audience will know when there's a problem, but they won't necessarily know how to fix it or even give good suggestions. One of the suggestions that I actually got to fix the waves was just to make health spawn. And I remember thinking like, oh, maybe that'll work. But in the back of my head, it's like, no, that's not going to solve this. So sitting down and playing the game after all that made me feel like the game was way more on rails than ever before. There was now a set number of waves, and the amount of money you were getting was largely the same. And the differences run to run just didn't seem that impactful. So now that the game is fundamentally different than what I started with, it's pretty obvious to me that I had to add a couple things to make up for all the stuff we lost. Oh, and there she goes, the scope up into the stratosphere farther than she's ever gone before. You know, that's good because I never wanted to make a game, just a fever dream of ideas scotch taped together. That's my initial plan. Okay, so we took away player agency for difficulty, but how can we give some of that back in a different way without the game totally breaking? One of the ways I could do this is by adding in optional rooms. So I added a secret room you bomb into, and there's like an enemy or a challenge there, and if you beat it, you're rewarded with a chest. I like this idea. I like having mystery to the game and secrets you can find, but I also really want to make sure that it's repeatable. So if you go to a second level, there's other walls you're bombing into and other challenges. And so for that reason, I want to make sure I don't go too crazy with it. Another idea I had was rewarding the player for not getting hit. I did set up a small combo mechanic. It basically said if you're not getting hit, you're getting a little bit more money from kills. I know I'm digging myself back into the same hole I was just in. I can't help it, but I want to do some level of rewarding for players that are avoiding getting hit. Even if that currency difference is pretty small at the end of the waves, I want that player to feel like they're rewarded for playing really well. So far, that mechanic is working okay, but I have my eye on it. It has the same framework of what got me in this trouble to begin with. And the last idea has been a long time coming. In order to help these runs feel a little different, I think it's finally time to start adding different guns to the game and changing the starting gun. This meant adding in a separate room where you're getting that gun. I also used this time to add keys and lock chests to the game. So now this starting room has this weapon chest that's unlocked, and then 2 chests that are locked, one an item chest and one a weapon mod chest. The hope is to supply the player with some level of agency so they can make the decision to either come back with keys and open these chests or just avoid it altogether. On a side note, I'm really happy with adding chests to the game. I should have added those months ago. They're really fun to open. It's fun to have things fly out and land on the ground. It's funny how the small, insignificant things can be way more fun and satisfying than the stuff that takes months to get in the game. So I'll take it. That's a small victory. So with these last 3 aspects of the game in, I feel like I should finally seal off the loop and go, all right, this is the game. If I can make this fun, then it can be the formula for everything else. And that's where I'm currently at now. I'm doing little tweaks and adjustments here and there to try to hone in on where everything should be, but then after that, hopefully I can just work on content, adding in new enemies, new bosses, new weapons now, which, hopefully won't be too much work. Some of the bigger stuff still kind of scares me, stuff like loading and saving the game, but I felt that way about the shop and that wasn't too hard to learn, so I'm hoping once you get in there and you watch some tutorials, it all makes sense. And I'm also looking forward to having people play it again and getting feedback. That stuff really means a lot and it helps me so much. And who knows, I might not really be out of the woods yet. I could still have some glaring issues that I just don't see, so having some other eyes on it would definitely help. As always, thank you guys for watching. It really means a lot to me and it helps me, keeps me motivated. And also it's just fun for me to share all this stuff, but I'll see you guys later.